Hi, and welcome to Tea Leaves Programming. Thanks for tuning in. So, for the past 5 weeks or so, I've been doing a deep dive on Wizardry the Five Ordeals, and part of that deep dive was using Grid Cartographer to map the levels. Now, this led to a misunderstanding with one of the commenters. Five Ordeals actually has auto mapping in the game. There's a spell called Wizard Eye that your magicians learn, and you can cast that spell and it will show you the map based on every place you've stepped. I map not because I must, I map because I like to map. So that was why I was messing around with Grid Cartographer. But there is an alternative mapping program called Gridmonger. And so after I finished the Five Ordeals walkthrough of those first 3 levels, I'm still playing the game. And what I did was I switched from using Grid Cartographer to a different mapping program called Gridmonger. Now, Gridmonger is not only free as in beer, but it's also open source. So if you don't like how the author did something, you can download the source code and change it yourself. You can see Gridmonger in use here. It has a lot of different themes, and I'm going to go through some of them later so you'll get to see them. The key attribute of Gridmonger that distinguishes it from Grid Cartographer, other than the price, is it is really built from the ground up and optimized for keyboard input. So although you can't see it here because of the nature of how I'm presenting it, the way it really wants you to use it is you move somewhere in game and then you want to make an annotation, and you, without taking your hands off the keyboard, Alt-Tab, use keyboard movement keys and kind of corded buttons to make your annotation. So for example, you'll see here that I'm carving out the floors as we go to different places. And the way you're doing that is by using the arrow keys to move the cursor and then hitting F. F carves out the floors. Or if I'm placing a wall, you're kind of cording that. You hold down the W key, which puts you in wall placement mode, and then you hit the arrow key for whichever wall it is that you want to add or remove. It took me a while before I was kind of ready to come to grips with Gridmonger, precisely because this keyboard heavy usage can be a bit intimidating at first. You sit down in front of it and there's no UI to speak of. You have to figure out that hitting question mark will open the help screen, and then you have to kind of interpret how the program will behave in different ways. There is a complete manual online, and I recommend reading the manual. It also describes some of the more advanced ways of doing things. The basic loop for Gridmonger is very simple once you're used to the keyboard commands. You're in your game, you take a step, you want to map, you Alt-Tab into Gridmonger. I'm going to hit F to carve out that step. Maybe I took 3 steps. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. You can place the walls. Is there a door at the end of the hallway? You can place a door. I'm doing all of this just with a keyboard, no mouse needed. I see that I placed the wrong door, a locked door. I wanted that to be an unlocked door. Alt-1 changes to the unlocked door glyph, and then I hold down R and hit the up arrow to replace the door. It is a bit overwhelming when you get started, but you get used to it very, very quickly. Gridmonger is fairly opinionated about the correct way to make maps. Let me make it larger here and show you what I mean. I spent a lot of time when I started playing with Gridmonger looking to find the precise icons to represent the things I wanted. So for example, I was looking for an elevator icon, but there isn't an elevator icon, and that's for the very sensible reason that adventure games are likely to have too many things to have custom icons for everything. So they have a nice panoply. Eventually I realized that what Gridmonger actually wants you to do is to annotate the map using more generic ways of doing things. So for example, in addition to these icons, you can put notes on a square with nothing. So, you know, here we are on the 7th level. And that will simply badge the corner of the icon. Or you can assign an ID or a tag. So here, for example, I've assigned the tag EV to indicate elevator, and that's pretty straightforward. That's not the only way you can do it. The other thing that is very interesting is it will auto number things if you want. We can assign one of 4 colors. I'm going to choose green for the elevator, and I'll say auto number it, and you can see now we have a number, and we have it automatically, our note appears down there. Up here, we have a note indicating that I encountered something, and then right here to the north, let's make another note noting that this door requires a special key. And I'm going to number this as well. I'm going to make it yellow since it's just informational. Requires special key. Now watch what happens to the numbers when I do this. Right, immediately everything renumbers. My instinct was that this is going to number based in the order in which I put these things down. Rather, it enforces a numbering from the top left to the bottom right. And whenever you add or delete a note, it renumbers. Like I said, this is pretty opinionated, but I kind of like it. The more I'm using Gridmonger, the more I am beginning to accept that there's a lot of functionality here that I haven't really plumbed yet. And so that's my caution for this. I started out by describing this as a review of Gridmonger. It's not really a review because I don't feel like I've used it enough to be able to give it a fair shake. I have used it enough to say that for any game in which I don't want the game length functionality of Grid Cartographer, I already prefer Gridmonger. In addition to these number and text label types, we could also put text directly on the map. So here in this cell, I've been given a riddle. The riddle is, we support our queen as one. And maybe I want to hypothesize the answer and note it on the map. I can hit Control T. It will ask me what color I want and what text I want. And so I'm going to say riddle bees with a question mark. And then that label shows up directly on the map. Maybe not something you want to do a lot, but occasionally you don't want to have the indirection of following a number. You just want text on the map. Gridmonger supports that. Now, of course, styling your maps is something that is very important. The whole reason you're making a map, if you're like me, is that you love having a visual representation. So I mentioned before that Gridmonger has different themes, and I very, very briefly showed a few. Let's plumb into that in a little more depth. So I was changing the theme by using a keyboard shortcut. Once again, Gridmonger very heavy on the keyboard usage. We can also bring up some hidden UI here by hitting F12. And this brings up the theme editor, which again, I have not plumbed the depths of the theme editor. You could see I'm using the sepia theme here. Let's just start at the top and walk through the themes very slowly. So we have the Beholder theme. I want to know what's the story behind these themes, or people probably just contributed them and gave them names. The Blueprint theme, I actually really like this one. In particular, one thing that happens, let me show what I mean, is you carve out an area using F to open up the floor, and you place walls. In a lot of the themes, those walls end up not being that visible in areas that you haven't fully carved out. And the Blueprint theme actually has, that bright white really, really pops. So I hit F to carve out that floor. If I want to erase those cells because they're not really part of my map, I could hit E. And I'm using just the arrow keys to maneuver that around. So let's see what else we've got. We've got Beholder. We've looked at Blueprint. Blueprint Gold. Very nice. Companion. Darkest Heart. Dark gray faded. So I'm not going to read all of these, but let me step through them. These, of course, these predefined themes, that's actually rather nice, are not the only ones. Let's say we have a theme that we kind of like. Okay, Legend of Grimrock, that's great. Manual, Old School Black, Old School Blue, Parchment. I think Parchment was one that I was using earlier. Some very cyberpunky themes here. Phosphors, so like your old monitor. Okay, so we're back here on Sepia. Well, let's say I wanted to use this sepia theme, but I wanted to address that issue about the walls not quite popping. Well, one thing I can do is I can say copy. We're going to give it a new name, so we'll say sepia tea leaves, and let's make the ugliest theme possible. So let's say we want to make our wall colors pop. So there's this foreground color, foreground normal. I'm just going to make them bright red. That's not going to look very good, but it will accomplish what I'm showing you. And we can see that we have indeed changed our foreground colors. The other thing that's interesting is we can change the background grid. So, I always drew on blue grid paper, so we can go ahead and change that, I think. No, it's floor grid is what I want. So that's this one over here. And can I just move that over there? Nah, it's not great. I want it to be like cyan. Well, that's way too bright. Let's try this. Pull that down there. Now we're getting something that's approximating that old school grid paper. Red lines on blue grid paper. Boy, this is pretty ugly, huh? So my point being, if you don't like any of the many themes, I'm going to save this here. You have a lot to choose from. So what else was there? There's WordNet. I guess this is kind of a proving grounds of the Mad Overlord feel for this one. My point being, whatever your taste is, you can probably find a theme that works for you. And if you can't, you've got this UI here to customize to your heart's content. The other major difference between this and Grid Cartographer is Gridmonger is meant entirely for manual mapping. So Grid Cartographer's claim to fame, of course, is that it has this, what do they call it, game link feature where it will plug into various DOSBox usually type games and do the mapping for you automatically. Similarly to All-Seeing Eye, which is a video I'll be showing probably the week after this one, using All-Seeing Eye to map Eye of the Beholder. So I really love this mapping program space, right? Why do I love it? Because it's, and I say this with respect, it's such a useless precaution. It's such useless beauty. The number of people who need dungeon mapping programs like this for this type of game, I mean, it has to be in the hundreds, right? I would be surprised if it was in the thousands. And yet, the amount of care and love that goes into, not just one, but multiple of these programs. These maps, I talk a lot about liminal spaces, right? These maps occupy a huge amount of brain geography for a lot of people, and people of all ages too. I don't think it's just old dudes like me, although we are probably overrepresented. I love that these exist. I'm so happy that people are making them. And I really do suggest to you, so try it sometime. Sometime when you're playing a game where you absolutely do not need to make a map, make a map. Do it not because you have to. Do it because you want to. Do it for fun. And I think you will find that this is much more fun than you expect. So that's Gridmonger. Would I use Gridmonger or Grid Cartographer for Wizardry the Five Ordeals? I'd use either of them. I think that if you already have one, you don't need to go out and get the other. If you don't have one, Grid Cartographer is pretty expensive, and that's probably a good reason to start with Gridmonger. I think if you are comfortable working entirely on the keyboard, you can use the mouse for some of these things in Gridmonger. I'm kind of overstating the case a little bit, but if you are a keyboard first person, then I would say start there and really dig in and explore it, and I hope enjoy it. All right, very short video. I just wanted to mention I spent so much time in Grid Cartographer, I felt I would be remiss if I didn't give Gridmonger its due. Now, if you just can't get enough of dungeon diving and mapping, I am going to be playing the original 1991 Eye of the Beholder game in MS-DOS with the AutoMap add-on called All-Seeing Eye, which I have never played with before, and I'm very curious about it. I am going to be doing these videos. I'm going to have one of these videos as a public video, which is basically the one that focuses on All-Seeing Eye, the mapping program. After that, I am going to continue playing Eye of the Beholder, but because I have all of these worries and concerns that that's not really great YouTube, I'm not going to make those videos public. Those are going to be members-only videos. They're going to be one for each level of Eye of the Beholder. If you're interested, please become a member at any level, and you will have access to those members-only videos. How many levels are there in Eye of the Beholder? I think there's 9, so that'll be a series of 9 videos, assuming that I can bring myself to actually finish the game, which I think I will. I've done it enough times that, you know, how can I say no? My secret hope, and I mentioned this in the members only video, is that this is a way of trying to exorcise with an O, Eye of the Beholder from my brain. If I can do this with the cheats and with, you know, the full map and all of the options available, I will know in my heart of hearts that I have seen everything that game has to offer. Anyway, those will start going up starting next week. So thank you so much for watching. Thank you for joining us here on Tea Leaves Programming. We've been gaming like it's 1979. Thanks for watching.